said, my name is Ben Tice, owner and director of Skull Marketing. What we do with Skull Marketing is we work with small business owners like yourself in things that you probably have heard of, like web development, search engine optimization, Google advertising, social media. But honestly, my favorite part of my job is doing these presentations to really kind of help people understand these topics and really kind of how to implement them. So just a couple of the recap of the housekeeping notes. As Elizabeth said, if you guys could just stay kind of muted, and we'll be able to answer questions in the chat. I always like it if there's at least maybe a couple people. I see Elizabeth and Lynn right now that have their video screen up. It always helps me that I can actually have a little person to actually speak to, but you obviously don't have to. Also, again, feel free to submit your questions via chat. Know that we will have some Q&A afterwards, as well as if there is a question you don't feel comfortable bringing up or you remember something later, you'll have my contact information, and please, by all means, feel free to reach out. That's where we're here to kind of just help answer questions, guide you, and get you in the right spot or answer that question for you. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started. And actually, one last thing I forgot to mention too is not only will we be recording this session and having it available, but I'll also be sending you guys the slides to also go along with the, again, the recorded copy as well. So you'll have two different sources of material that you can use as a resource later on. And so, okay, so now that we got that done, we'll go ahead and get started. And so today we're going to be talking about search engine optimization 2.0. So for those of you who have taken our 1.0 course, we talk a little bit, obviously, of kind of laying the foundation, some of the basics. Now we're actually going to go a little bit further into now now, Ben, that we talked about what SEO is, and I know that I need to do images or metadata or content, but now how do I implement that? What are some more of the parameters, and what are some more of the advanced stuff that I should be looking at if I'm going to be taking SEO seriously, either personally, internally, or externally? So just to make sure that we're on the same page, though, I do like just to take a step back. And really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to essentially understand how Google, Yahoo, Bing read our website and actually overall web presence, so that we can essentially communicate with them. So the more they fully understand it, obviously the better they understand it, which essentially then leads to better rankings, because they can essentially understand, index, and then rank our site. So the biggest thing that I always like to kind of tell people with SEO, and if you've seen me before, you've heard this phrase before, but it's like having a long-term business relationship with Google. So just like any long-term business relationship, it doesn't happen, again, overnight. We just don't go to a networking meeting. We meet someone for the first time and we're each other's #1 referral partners. It takes time to kind of build that. It makes sure that they adequately know what we do, where we do it, and then building up that trust factor. Also realizing why I like the analogy with a business relationship is it's like, again, you don't know other people that are in your industry that they may be connecting with. So we really have to focus on, the person in front of us, i.e. Google, to be able to build that relationship up and really kind of, understand as much as possible of how they want to essentially read us, so that then we can essentially give them that information and they can use that to rank us. So just a couple little things I kind of like to mention too. First is Google holds about it kind of depends on your area, but about a 70% market share across the board. If you actually want to boil that down to more kind of like Midwest, around here, you're more or less actually going to find that to be closer to like 80 to 85%. And actually some small businesses that we deal with, even including ourselves, we actually reach up to a lot of times 90% Google market share. The reason I point that out is, yes, Yahoo, Bing, Ask, all these other kind of search engines are definitely important, because even if it's 1% or 10%, that's obviously other searches that are being done. But when we're looking at resources, when we're looking at getting the best ROI, and more importantly, realizing how SEO and how these other search engines essentially look up to Google and allow them to be a trailblazer, that's when we're able to then kind of realize that if we focus on Google, essentially there's a ripple effect that will go to Yahoo, Bing, Ask, and all those. So we don't necessarily need a strategy for all of them. Now, there are some things like each of them may have their own Webmaster tools or Search Console, their own map system or local listings, which are important to take advantage of. But pure SEO strategies are a lot of times we're going to focus on Google and have that kind of, auxiliary effect or ripple effect out to the other ones. Another kind of fun fact too, some people don't know is, actually Yahoo doesn't actually even have their own search algorithm anymore. They actually farm out Bing's. So we actually start to get a little bit more convoluted even when we start looking at some of those out there. Another thing to keep in mind too is Google's algorithm actually roughly makes about 400 updates a year. Now, again, we're not saying that you need to, again, change your website or something like that 400 times per year, but it's the idea that Google's constantly changing to not only thwart bad, but also to work with user experience and to kind of make sure that they're staying modern. Now, again, with the, again, 400 changes, a lot of those honestly are very minor. Most likely they're not even having an effect on you. But a lot of times there are about 1 to 3 big changes per year that actually do impact the majority of us or very certain industries that it's important to stay on top of, or just make sure this is also why we want to have a business relationship with Google and make sure that we're kind of staying on top of these things. And the other thing is just to make sure that, again, the ROI, has changed over the years, meaning that, for some people, it used to be the only way they got business. Now, it may not be the only way you get business because we have social media. We also have SEM and things like that. But what SEO's kind of become is kind of the glue that keeps everything together. So while yes, it's still its own channel, there's a more even emphasis now on, again, SEO is intertwined with social media, is intertwined with search engine marketing, is intertwined with video. All these other types of things are kind of intertwined in kind of the glue that keeps a lot of that together and is kind of the behind the scenes master, if you will, of a lot of those platforms and digital strategies. So again, it's just, this is a little bit of review from our last one, but want to again, make sure that we're on the same page here. And so it's important to realize that there are 2 different phases of search engine optimization, and there's 3 different types of search engine optimization. So the 3 different types are going to be back-end optimization. So this is everything obviously behind the scenes. This is honestly usually the one that throws people a little bit because we're dealing with things that maybe you're not as familiar with, either with your WordPress, your Weebly, your Joomla settings, dealing with actual HTML or PHP coding or things along that nature that you may have to kind of deal with potentially, but it's obviously everything kind of behind the scenes on a website. Then obviously we have the opposite side of that, front-end optimization. This is pretty much everything that a user is going to see. So it's all the content, it's all of just the structure of your site, it's the actual media, so pictures, images, colors, contrast, all of that kind of fun stuff. And then last but not least is offsite optimization, even though 2/3 of SEO is going to be obviously about your website, which makes sense. Believe it or not, though, there's 1/3 of your website or your website presence, I should say, that again isn't even again your actual website. It's everything that's not your website but pointed to it. And so this is social media accounts, local listings, YouTube, for instance, if you're part of associations, like for instance, maybe you're in BNI or an industry specific, everyone kind of has their own page and you have an opportunity to link back to your website, that would be an instance of offsite optimization. So those are going to be the 3 different types. And as I mentioned before, they're done in 2 different phases. So the first phase is essentially, you can almost think about it as kind of a one-time thing. You may have to freshen it up from here and there, but if you do it correctly and you do it right, and you also don't necessarily need to do this at the beginning of a website build, meaning that if you're building a website, you should definitely do this, but you don't have to necessarily tear down your website and to be able to do foundational. You can do it with your current website. Really what foundational SEO is, and we're going to go into this a little bit further, specifically what some of these things are that you can do, is that it's essentially communicating the what and the where of what your website and your product and your service and your company does. So that Google, again, understands what you do or what you sell or what you offer, and then where you do that or where you offer that. Is that locally? For instance, like the Reserve, where the Reserve is going to be more of a local kind of, Twin Cities kind of based kind of company, but we may have some people on here that are e-commerce. Well, again, if we're e-commerce, we're most obviously likely going to be, national or international. It's going to be a different geographic area, which definitely plays into search engine optimization. So once we kind of lay that foundation with Google, which means we're going through the site, we're going through all phases, we go through all the pages, all the pictures, we get all of that kind of stuff set, then we start to turn into what we kind of call relational or ongoing SEO. This is then building that relationship, that long-term business relationship with Google. We're building that trust. We're really kind of convincing Google why. Why should Google rank us above others, again, that are searching for the same thing. Again, going back to that analogy that if you're part of a networking group and you again, have a relationship with someone in your networking group, there's no guarantee that you're the only person in your own industry that they're talking to. So we need to make sure that we have the best possible relationship with them. And that's ultimately why, again, we want to show Google why they should rank us above somebody else that may be in the same industry. And so again, we'll kind of get into how we do that here. So the first thing to start with, and this kind of goes with not only foundational, but a really key thing is to do ongoing keyword research as well. And I'll get into that in just a second. So keyword research starts at the very basic I always like to tell people is literally take out a piece of paper or take out a Word document and just start writing down the two main things are going to be your services and your geographic area. Those are going to be your two main things to kind of start with. The reason for that is that's mainly how people are going to search, obviously, for your products or services. Now, what you want to do is you can definitely start to layer in some demographics, potentially with age, gender, just other demographics you may like out there, realizing though that when it comes to search engine optimization, it's what they're actually searching for that's important, not necessarily who they are as an individual. Yes, it's important to us, but SEO, we can only get so much information. Where we can get all that other information that I just alluded to is like, for instance, social media, because we can go after who the person is, their likes, their dislikes. Again, think about it when you go to a Google.com or on your phone or whatnot, and you do a search. Again, you're not telling them who you are necessarily. You're just telling them what you're looking for. So the important piece is to start with those two things. Again, what you offer and where you offer that at, and then start to kind of, again, cross and kind of make your own search terms. Now, what we want to do then is it's really imperative. Again, you can take that list and go from there, but if you want to take SEO seriously and you really want to start to create a relationship with Google, we're going to definitely want to do some keyword research. What we take then is, and this is what essentially digital marketing has become, is you want to take the best of both worlds. You want to take the best of your own personal knowledge of your business, and then you want to mix it with technology that can obviously do a lot of the mundane and the type of data searching and find anomalies and find patterns and things like that and push those together. That's what we're doing here. So we're taking our manpower, our brain power, I should say, and writing down the different services and kind of coming up with our own search terms. And then we're going to go to a tool like, for instance, Moz, M-O-Z, or SEMrush. Those are two really platforms that I like to kind of utilize. They both have freemium models, which means you can actually get a free up to a certain level, free, and then obviously if you want to do more, they're going to charge you for it. And there's actually one other one that I will mention too is if you want, there's a completely free one that's actually within Google AdWords. So what's kind of cool about it is you can set up a Google AdWords account without actually paying, and you can utilize the Google Keyword Planner tool. So the three that you could look at, I would highly recommend too, because it's not very high cost, but I really would recommend looking at Moz, M-O-Z, or SEMrush. But you can also layer in Google. What these platforms are going to be able to do is we're going to be able to say, okay, hey, Moz or SEMrush, these are the search terms that I essentially want to go after. Here's my website. Now, again, like I said, do all that mundane kind of stuff behind the scenes and tell me if I'm on the right track, or tell me other search terms that people are actually searching for. Because this is another key thing that a lot of times we get into sometimes with small business owners. We'll be talking to a small business owner and we find out that people are actually searching for something that's, again, let's just hypothetically use that they're searching for ACB. And they're searching that way, but the business owner tells me that, well, no, how they should be searching is ABC. And it's like, again, I completely understand what we're talking about, and we want to make sure that our brand is represented correctly. But at the end of the day, it's what the searcher is actually searching for. And at the end of the day, what we should care about is getting the right people, no matter what they're searching for, even if it's not correct in our minds, to us if we obviously can offer that product or service. So again, the reason I say that is something like Moz or SEMrush, it can be very imperative to help you either find other search terms that maybe you didn't think about, or even you maybe consider not 100% correct, but again, are going to be related and actually still bring you potential customers, which at the end of the day, obviously is what we want, but also potentially even verify and validate the ones that you have. And then also what it does is it essentially scores them. So it tells us, again, for instance, the monthly volume that people search for on those. Now, a couple things with that is that's really great because we can actually start to prioritize those keywords. And that's the next phase of keyword research. We start with the list, then we put it into the, again, Moz or the SEMrush. And then the third step is actually prioritizing them and realizing that, yes, we can't necessarily rank for every single keyword that we can think number one. Doesn't mean we can't rank or be in the conversation, but we obviously have limited space, and we'll get into that here in just a few minutes on where we can communicate this stuff to Google. So we have to make some decisions and we have to prioritize some of those services. Again, does not mean you can't rank for all your services, but again, we only have a certain amount of high real estate area that we can put some of this into. And so when we look to prioritize, one key thing to remember here too, when you're looking at keyword research and keyword data, is that, obviously our intuition is going to go, well, Ben, I want to go after the search terms that are, again, if I'm looking at 3 search terms, one has 10 a month, one has 100 a month, and one has 1,000 a month. Obviously, our natural intuition is to go to the 1,000 one because that's more possibility. The thing to remember, though, and the thing that you actually want to kind of blend all 3 of those together is because obviously with more search volume comes more competition. So it actually is one of those things, and it can be a strategy where you actually go after some of the smaller ones because you can actually get, if you're number one, even if it's 10 times per month that someone searches for that, that might actually be more valuable than being, if you start, maybe you're on the second page, maybe you're on the bottom of the first page for the 100 or the 1,000. So it's important to kind of blend some of those together because again, we want a good array of, of distribution and being able to be found on those platforms. Another thing to remember too is if we can actually start with some smaller ones, again, they're called long tail keywords, or usually the longer your phrase is, the less it's going to be searched, but the more specific it is. So sometimes actually longer phrases can actually be more valuable because if someone takes the time to actually keep typing in and wants to be very specific, you actually have a higher likelihood of someone actually going to your website and potentially converting than someone like, I'll give you an example. If I'm looking for a dentist, if I just type in dentist, that's going to be very broad. But if I type in emergency dentist, again, crown, or something along that nature, obviously that's much more specific and I'm looking for something. I actually have a higher likelihood if I'm the dental practice of ranking for that longer key-tailed keyword. I actually now have a better probability of that person clicking on me because again, I was searching and I'm doing SEO for that particular word instead of just dentist. So again, you can kind of blend those together, but really there's actually a strategy where some of those longer phrases and longer keywords can actually be more beneficial. But so again, we want to do that keyword research just real quick. Again, we're going to go with the writing down our services and location. We're going to put it into Moz or SEMrush, and then we're going to prioritize. Now, once we have that, that's when we're going to move on to the next step. Elizabeth, do you have a question?
How do we or should we search for competitors' keywords?
Yes. So actually, Megan, it's a great question. Actually, within both Moz and SEMrush, there are opportunities where we can do competitive analysis, or we can actually see where we rank, as well as what they're ranking for as well. So it's not only is it good to potentially kind of see what they're ranking for to see if we can actually go after that keyword, but it's also potentially to see maybe what they're not going after and where there's actual an opportunity. So fantastic question. That's actually a big part. I'm glad you brought that up, is that can be a huge component to really look at some of our competitors and our competitor websites with these programs, because I will say it's really hard to do some competitive analysis if you're just doing normal search phrases on your own, just typing them in and kind of doing it. It's much easier to use a Moz or an SEMrush that can actually take all that data behind the scenes and then give it to you. And then you essentially can use your brain power to dissect it. Okay, so now that we have, essentially our keywords, now the next phase is going to be actually looking to implement this into the site. And this goes into a little bit more of that foundational SEO for these first few. So the first one is looking at metadata. So metadata is honestly really super valuable. Remember when we talked about when we had limited space on the areas, again, to communicate with Google? Well, this is one of them, and this is a super important one. So the first one I want to get out of the way is called meta tags. You still may see this, or you still may hear this phrase. And so meta tags are essentially, you used to essentially be able to just type in keywords that would be communicated to Google. This literally is about 8 to 10 years old, where Google does not use these anymore. But believe it or not, you can actually still find CMS systems or other applications that will still ask for meta tags. The reason Google doesn't use meta tags anymore, where you just say, hey, these are the keywords that I want to, again, rank for, it's all behind the scenes and people essentially manipulated the system, as well as it's not very sophisticated. What Google does now, though, is they're going to, we have to be, again, strategic and though, still using those keywords, but now weaving them into content that people can see. That's the key thing here that Google's is changing or changed to, is that instead of you just telling me behind the scenes, we're going to take the stuff that, yes, you can still communicate to us as in Google, but we're going to take the stuff that you're publicly also being able to view from, again, your users. So meta tags are not used anymore. So if you see something that just says a box that just you can fill in for keywords, or says meta tags or things like that, you can fill it in if you really want. It's just not going to have any positive or negative effect on you. Now, the only thing I will mention is two things. YouTube does have a spot for tags that you can utilize. As well as if you use a blogging platform like WordPress, and there's a couple other ones out there, they'll ask for tags on a blog. That's completely separate. Those types of tags, even like within YouTube, are for internal use, meaning that you can almost think of them as hashtags. You can hashtag your, again, your blog post with marketing or whatever. You can kind of categorize it so that people can kind of search through those. It doesn't really have any bearing on SEO, and it's not the same as meta tags, but you might see that terminology out there. The more important ones here are, as kind of an example, you can kind of see to the right, are meta titles and meta descriptions. So meta titles are the blue kind of, again, hyperlinks that you see that are essentially when you do a Google search for, digital marketing Hopkins, you do roof to deck decoration as the example there, and you kind of get those different results. They're the blue hyperlinks that sit there, that if you click them, they turn purple. But essentially what we have here, this is super important. So every single page on your website has the opportunity for a meta title, and you should take the time to go through every single page and try and optimize your meta titles. Now you can use some formulas, meaning that you can pull in the title of your page as well as the name of your website to kind of be able to help you kind of along, but you should still at least review each one of them because we want them to be unique. This is also another opportunity, like we kind of talked about, to either dive into those one or two key phrases, or potentially to kind of spread them out through some of our other pages for maybe location. Instead of just Minneapolis, maybe it's St. Paul. If instead of Christmas lighting Minneapolis, maybe it's Christmas decoration St. Paul. We kind of play around with some of those different keywords. Now, the important thing here is that when we look at a meta title, we have essentially about 75 characters. So again, remember, a character is going to be a space, letter, punctuation. So it's not a lot of space. So you have to be very concise, knowing that, again, a user is going to see this, and we want to get as much value in there as possible. Now, meta titles do get a little tricky trying to get some keywords in. A lot of times it's mainly going to be, again, kind of the page title along with your business name. But sometimes you can actually, depending on how long, again, obviously your name is, how long your page title is, there most likely is still going to maybe be 10, 15, 20, maybe even 25 characters left. And this is where at the end of it, you can kind of see the example to the right-hand side here is we can add Minneapolis. Maybe we can, if we have enough space, we can add Minneapolis and St. Paul, Twin Cities, just even MN. Maybe we only have 3 characters left, space, MN, can, again, be very helpful. One thing to remember too is Google knows, again, knows if you type in Minnesota or MN, you mean the same thing. So from an SEO perspective, sometimes it can be more advantageous for us to use just MN instead of all of Minnesota, because Minnesota is going to take up more characters than just MN, and Google still knows what we're talking about. So again, meta titles, 75 characters. Now, if you go over that limit, it's fine. You do not get penalized, but it's not going to show up. A lot of times you'll see just a ... and it kind of cuts it off right there. And so you kind of want to just play around with that, knowing that this goes for meta descriptions, which I'll get into in just a second. Google does sometimes like to play with the amount of characters that are shown. So, again, sometimes it's not a bad thing to sometimes go over a little bit, as long as that word maybe is just cut off a little bit, or as maybe that phrase or that keyword isn't as important, because some devices and sometimes Google actually changes this, and someone may be actually able to see that. Like desktop compared to mobile, a lot of times Google will play around with actually showing more information on one than the other. But just if you're looking for a good kind of number to be around, 75 characters is going to be it for titles. Now, one thing I didn't mention about this is how do you implement this? Now, that's sometimes the tricky part, because every CMS or content management system is going to be different. So really what you want to do is simply just Google, again, how to change my meta title in WordPress, in Weebly, in Joomla, whatever it may be, because the implementation is going to be different. If we've got 15 people on this webinar right now, we may have 10 different CMS systems. It's going to be different on how you implement it, but what we implement and the character limits and all the strategy that we're talking about is going to be the same amongst all CMS platforms. And so once we get meta titles done, then we go into meta descriptions, and that's going to be the black text that you see at the bottom right, or to the right of this, underneath the meta title. Now we have a much more of a description and much more of an area that we can essentially do. So Elizabeth, do you have a question?
Yes, I was going to wait, but there's a question from Loretta. What if the title is a product?
Oh, that's completely fine. So again, if the title's a product, honestly, product names are really good, because usually there's some descriptive or there's some search value in that product name. So the meta title, again, sorry, when I said page name, technically, again, one of your product pages is still considered a page. So it doesn't matter if it's a blog post, doesn't matter if it's a product, doesn't matter if it's an actual page, like an about page or something like that. They're all considered pages. So a page title or a product title in that case could absolutely be good. Now, the one thing with products, Loretta, that, again, you kind of bring up in a sense, is that they are done a little bit differently, and sometimes depending on what your product name is, it may be longer than 75 characters. So this is one of those instances why I always say is, default, a lot of times the system will pull in information, like, again, just the title or something like that, but you do want to review it, because if there's a way that we can concisely, again, pare it down or rearrange some of the keyword and the key phrases, because maybe what the system is pulling in and telling Google maybe isn't the best, because it doesn't prioritize, like we talked about previously, or make the best use of the first 75 characters. So moving on to like the meta description, as we talked about, is going to be that black description there. It's about 156 characters. Now, again, this is something that Google's actually experimented with all the way up to 270 characters. But again, you at least want to make sure you have 156 characters. And then again, if you want to go a little bit over, that's fine, knowing that sometimes it may be cut off, and you want to make sure that the higher priority ones are in here. Now, essentially what you have here with 156 characters roughly is about 1.5 to 2 sentences. So again, what you want to do is, your system will pull in usually the first 156 characters on the page. Most often than not, that's usually probably not the best way to do things, because the way that maybe you start one of your service pages or your about page probably isn't, again, within a 1.5 to 2 sentences, keyword richly telling a user and telling Google what that page or what your company or what your service or product does. So what a meta description does then is we want to take the time to write out 1.5 to 2 sentences of really good keyword laden kind of rich, again, description here that then can be communicated to Google, but not only Google, but also users. So you can see the example here that, again, this company, Roof to Deck Decoration, a lot of times I will say, sometimes we avoid trying to put the name again in the description, but for them, it worked really well because they have decoration in the name. They do decoration, roof decoration, all this other kind of stuff. So I'm saying sometimes play around with that, but you can kind of see here that we have Christmas lighting, we have Minneapolis, we also put in Minnesota, light displays, and things like that. So we at least have 3 or 4 different types of keywords already in that 1.5 sentences. Now, what you want to make sure of that you don't do is do not just list your keywords. Just don't, for this example, just do Christmas lighting, comma, Christmas decoration, comma, Xmas celebration decoration. Do not just list it. It still has to be, again, more of a coherent sentence and communication. Elizabeth, question.
I think that kind of answers the question. So the meta description needs to be in full sentences with punctuation.
Correct.
Okay, that question's from Deb, so.
Yeah, so again, yeah, and so just because we have 156 characters, that's what we have to try to still be creative, and that's why I even said, like, in some instances where it says roof to deck decoration is, we did that because it was kind of a keyword, but sometimes you can just say, we are a leader or are a leader in providing, Christmas lighting and stuff like that. If you have potentially, because you can save some of that, again, some of those characters, as well as why we use MN, because if someone were just looking for Christmas lighting MN, Google will still pick that up, even though we list Minneapolis there as well. So that's, again, where it kind of, becomes a little bit of a strategy. But again, this is one of those things where if you go through your entire site and do your meta titles and meta descriptions correctly, along with your keyword research using that data, this is more of those foundational SEO kind of pieces where you don't need to continuously be changing this. The only thing you would need to be changing is if you're adding pages, adding blogs, adding products. You just want to make sure that same method is being done throughout. So next is header tags. And so header tags are done within your actual content. And this is something that, again, is not only going to be foundational, but as you add content, you're going to be able to have the, you're going to want to make sure that this is kind of changed. Now, actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to show you guys an example of this, because sometimes it's just easier to kind of look at. And so really at the end of the day, while I'm logging in here, is what a, again, header tag is these are like, think about this, if you're reading a textbook, H1 is like the title of your chapter. That's an H1. Then when we get into the chapter, we kind of have sub, titles, then subtitles, then subtitles. And so it's really a matter of, again, that. I'm just going to try and pull up one of our, again, blog posts to kind of show you guys here what we're talking about. Now you have all the way down, or all the way from H1 to H6. Really what that means is, obviously, as you go further up the numbers, it actually means the smaller the text. So in H, again, 6 is going to be smaller text than H5, then H4, then H3. But here's the caveat, and this is why, you may be asking yourself, well, Ben, that sounds all great, but what does having bigger or smaller text really do for me on an SEO kind of perspective? Well, so the thing to look at here, sorry, I just got to get in here, is not only can you kind of see here that it actually, again, splits up the content, but having like this title of, should I run Facebook ads? Instead of, again, the thing you don't want to do is just have it be text and then enlarge the font. Actually using, and this is just, with WordPress, but a lot of them are the same, you can see up here, I'm actually telling Google what type of content or what type of text this is. When we say a header tag, what Google then does is they understand, they read it like a textbook. They can kind of go through the page and go, okay, hey, here are the different, sub-chapters within this actual chapter of it. So the one thing to remember is you only want one H1. The beauty of it is almost every CMS system out there, what they'll do is anytime you do a title, Anytime you name an article, they automatically have it coded that that's your H1. So the only thing that you need to remember then is that when you start out, you do not want to have this be an H1. If we do this, this is incorrect because you never have 2 chapter titles. You have 1 chapter title, then you go further down into the chapter and you have different types of sub chapters. Now, here's the other thing too is, once you get past H1, which you can only have 1 of, you can have unlimited H2 to H6. Now, you don't need to go crazy. It's a lot of times not only for user experience, but remember, kind of doing like, so I can skim through the chapter if I'm Google and understand what's happening. Again, for this article could be, okay, should I run Facebook ads? Facebook ad types. And then we kind of get into more things right here, how to create your first Facebook ad, all of those types of things. Now, again, in this particular blog, in this particular example, we're only using H2. What would happen though is if you were using H3, you would essentially, so again, if you had like, again, a subcategory, like I'll give you an example. If I had if I was going into some of our services that we do, and maybe I do snow plowing. Well, again, if I did a blog post about snow plowing, maybe I'll title it my H1, snow plowing in the Minneapolis area. Then I'd have H2 of maybe business and residential. Now, underneath business, I may then have an H3, which is now, again, remember, kind of a sub header that would then maybe say townhouses. Or townhouses associations. Then it would go into commercial sized businesses, main streets, or something like that. And each one of them then would have a description underneath it. So again, at the end of the day, all you need to remember is just utilizing these to parse out your content, but actually knowing that it actually has an impact on SEO. Again, you don't have to utilize H3, H4, H5 to actually have a benefit. You could just use H2s. As you can see, honestly, most, most blog posts usually just go to H2s. But it's important to realize that because we see it all the time where people just will either, continue to have these be H1s or just paragraph. Another thing too is you can also skip H2, H3 and go straight to H4. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is just use header tags and just make sure that you're not doing more than 1 H1. On it. So again, I know that can kind of confusing, and the hard part is that, again, this is one of those things that every blog post is different, every piece of content is different, every CMS is different, but if you can remember looking at those they're called header tags, header titles sometimes as well, and just making sure that you kind of just, consciously every time you do content, or if you go through your content right now, we want to make sure that we're, again, kind of parsing out and really think about your content as a textbook chapter from high school or college. That'll probably be the best way that you can kind of think about it and really just start to divvy up your page like that. The next one is called alt tags. And so this is essentially what you're doing is you're telling Google within kind of more of a phrase. This does not have to be perfect punctuation or sentence format, but within a quick phrase of what that image is. So you want to make sure that you have images on your site and almost try to have them on every single page, because not only does it help with your text to media ratio, which, believe it or not, Google actually looks at, but also just helps you with the user experience. But what alt tags essentially do is they are going to, again, in a phrase format, tell Google what that picture is. Now, again, the beauty of it is you can most likely use some of your keywords, because most likely you're going to be using some pictures that are most likely related to the content, which then can be utilized to kind of explain what that picture is about. So again, you would just go, and this is going to be different for every CMS system, but you essentially would go to either your image library, like for instance, if it's WordPress, or sometimes your Wix or your Weebly's and stuff like that, you'd have to do them individually on each image, on each page by clicking them, and then just typing in, again, sometimes it's alt tag, sometimes it's alt text, sometimes it's image text. You just have to there's just some different verbiage that's used, but essentially within there, using a quick phrase. So when I say a quick phrase, you're probably, again, it's not going to be a full sentence. It's going to be half to a third of a sentence to quickly just describe what that image is. Two things. One is just doing that helps you because you're taking the extra effort to communicate more data to Google. And like I said, if you're using relevant images, you're most likely going to be able to use some of your keywords or key phrases to actually describe those images as well, which again is, as you can see what we're doing here, if it's header tags, if we can put keywords in there, if it's meta titles, if it's meta descriptions, if it's alt tags, we're continuously using this, again, real estate to potentially even communicate the same thing over and over to Google of what we do, but it bangs Google over the head and reaffirms what we do, where we do it, and then ultimately why they should choose us. Elizabeth, question.
Yes, from Deb, it used to be important to name the image file in a phrase such as company-name-keyword.jpg. Is that still important, or do alt tags for images overtake that?
So if you can name your images, it's great. But what I usually find is a lot of people, like, what's not advantageous is to go through a website and then download all those images, rename them and re-up them. It's just not worth the time and the energy and the way that it's read anymore. But yes, if you do have some images offsite, it can be advantageous for you to actually take that same phrase sometimes and use it to actually name the image file, and you use it with dashes, no spaces. Again, don't put it all together. Use dashes because that's like a space within a file. Perfect. Did that answer the question?
Just a comment from Loretta. This is what something got messed up on. She did with the product and the color, like 6090_black. So she's having to change all of them. Does that make sense?
Unfortunately doesn't. And maybe if we can save that one just for the last, because I can pull up some stuff then too. Again, I'd love to get to that one, but that, again, I'm not quite understanding that. I might have to see something to do that then. Okay, so moving on. So another thing to keep in mind is a sitemap. So what is a sitemap? A sitemap is what we call an XML file. It's a live kind of living file that sits on the back end of your website. And then what we want to do is we want to take that file and we want to connect it to Google. Now, how we do this is called Google Search Console. And what we do then is we can essentially submit our sitemap to Google. What this does is Google's eventually going to get around to everybody's site and keep re-indexing them, meaning that every time you produce more content, Google's going to come around and obviously then re-index it so they know they have the freshest content. If you're adding content with keywords, if for instance, you've had a website for 5 years and after this presentation, you go, hey, Ben, I'm going to do that foundational SEO. Obviously, you want Google to re-index it because you have great new information for them to do that you hadn't had before. But what happens is when you do it with Search Console is you essentially kind of raise your hand and say, hey, Google, and it's done even faster. Also within Search Console, you can see potentially errors that your website is throwing up, anything, again, alerts. Search Console has gotten very, very important for SEO. I encourage everyone to make sure that you're utilizing it. Now, one of the questions maybe, well, Ben, how do I submit a sitemap or how do I create one of those? And the two easiest things to do is, one is if you're using a DIY builder, again, Weebly, Squarespace, Wix, all those, is they automatically create one for you. It most likely is your website URL /sitemap.xml. That's usually the most common one. You can all, go check your, your website right now to see if that was the case, but it's usually your website after the .com /sitemap.xml. That's what you're going to want to check. Now, if you realize you don't have one and you have more or less like a WordPress or something like that, a plugin that I would highly recommend is called SEO Yoast, Y-O-A-S-T. So SEO Yoast not only can help you integrate your meta titles and meta descriptions and things like that excellently, but it also can create a sitemap for you, which then you would submit to Google. And again, how you kind of do that is you just go to Google Search Console, click on the sitemap button, and it'll walk you through it. But again, those are the things that you want to look for. See if you have a sitemap. If you don't, I encourage you, if you have WordPress, to use SEO Yoast. If you have a DIY builder, you actually already have one. You just need to submit it to Google. Another thing to kind of keep in mind as we're looking at this is your CMS system. Again, CMS system just means content management system. It's essentially so that you do not have to build your website purely in 100% code. It's putting some type of visual back into it so that you can obviously manage it easier or potentially build it yourself. But the one thing to do it, especially with WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, a lot of these, again, open source CMS systems, with WordPress being the most popular, is that a lot of them have security updates, software updates, plugin updates, theme updates that have to be done. Believe it or not, it actually does help a little bit with your SEO though too, making sure those things are up to date, because Google can see how, again, when you're logging to the back end, seeing if your site is outdated and those types of things. Not only is obviously that important for user experience, so your website doesn't get hacked, that obviously, as we all know with every piece of software we have, it's obviously always nice. There's a reason that patches and software updates, if it's, again, on our phones, on our computers, on our video games, wherever it may be, there's always updates coming out and there's a reason for that. So you want to make sure that you're keeping those up to date. It's one of the things that we see all the time that people forget to do. And I always like to just tell people is it's the #1 way that websites get hacked is that people do not keep their software updated. So you have to go on the back end and you have to figure out where your software is, but then you'd be able to kind of do it. So next is going to be backlinks. I like to talk about backlinks because this is usually something that people have heard of before, but are either a little confused or a little apprehensive or cautious about, and for right reasons. So backlink, at the end of the day, what a backlink is it's essentially a link from another website that gets linked to your website. So some of these you can create yourself, obviously via Facebook, a YouTube, a BNI profile, whatever it may be. But other ones, though, the reason that backlinks are so important and so valuable is Google looks at this and says, wow, so this person's website is saying that your website that they're linking to is so important that they're actually going to send people away from their website to yours. That's why backlinks are important. Now, the thing that you want to stay away from is just buying backlinks, because a lot of times you can get into link networks or link farms that can actually have an adverse effect to you. So how you want to, again, increase your backlinks as much as possible is take advantage of the ones that you can create yourself. Again, social media accounts, YouTube accounts, profile accounts, anywhere really local listings that you can put your business and you can put your link to it. Could even be something as, if I office at the Reserve, I know a lot of times they list different companies or they have different directories. That could even potentially be something there as well. And then the other thing though too is you want to take as much advantage of those as possible. 2 is if you have any sister sites, you can kind of link back and forth strategically. Maybe that's through a blog page, maybe that's through a partners page, a resource page, and you guys can help yourself out there if you own the sites. And then last but not least is also just making sure you have good content that people would like to potentially share. The more content we create, the more opportunities we have within, again, people to actually link to us. Another important thing, one last thing about kind of backlinks is actually inter-site linking, meaning that on your own site, actually linking to other pages can be very helpful. So let me give you an example. If I'm writing a blog post, that one that we just saw for Skull Marketing talking about Facebook ads, if you actually went to the bottom, there's actually a link that goes to our website that goes either to our contact page, as well as we always try and also link it to one of our service pages. So that one, for instance, I could most likely highlight Facebook ads or something like that, and then link it to one of my service pages, as well as contact us for more information and link it to my contact page. So if you can, you want to actually try and link to, as long as it's, again, applicable, but a lot of websites, even on your own websites, probably are referencing something else that you could kind of link to. Now you want to be careful. I usually try to tell people limit it to like 1 or 2 links per page. If you get too many, if I'm on your service page and talking about your snow removal and you're linking to 17 different pages, it gets a little excessive. Elizabeth, is there a question?
A couple questions. Is a PHP software level important to keep updated?
Yes.
Okay.
PHP level is, but it's I will say sometimes it's easier said than done. It depends on how old your website is, what it was built on, everything. So PHP, if you want to think about it, is like the actual like framework or like the rebar of your foundation that we're kind of filling in with cement and then building the house on. So you have to be very careful on being able to replace that. Some websites can cause issues with that.
Okay. And then one more question. Is it important to have like the person or whoever created the website to have the creator of that website like linked to that person?
Sorry. Oh, so like at the bottom of the website, it's like created by Skoll Marketing or whatever.
Yeah.
So really that's a favor to the company that you're doing. It does give you, again, it doesn't really give you much because you're linking out to them, but it does benefit the other company that the link is coming to.
Deb, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'm starting a company, Webs by Deb, and so if I create a website for somebody, I was thinking put my website, you know, copyright, or created by my website. That creates a backlink if I put them in the footer, and my client agrees that.
Correct. So and that would help you, and then like so like we're like for instance like at Skoll Marketing we do that a lot of times, but then on the reverse of that we're actually redoing our entire website. But one of the things that we're actually introducing is more of a more comprehensive portfolio, and so what we're also then going to do is actually then list the website of our client back there as well. So it's kind of a benefit to them and a benefit to us, and then what it does is it creates a link loop because you're both linking to each other. So that's like the best way to do it. But yes, if you were to get some link on someone else's site to you, then that's still at least beneficial. But it's more the person that's linking to is they're the ones that are going to get the benefit. So we're going to talk about SSL and speed just kind of coming up here. One last thing I just want to mention, and this is mainly for if you're rebuilding a site, if you start changing page names and all this kind of stuff, you want to make sure you mentally note and probably even write down the word 301 redirects. So what a 301 redirect does is anytime you change anything in the URL path, meaning that if I have skollmarketing.com/workshops and maybe we're redoing this site and maybe I want to change it to skollmarketing.com/events. Well, if I just launch with the new site and I just go, yep, /workshops is gone, /events is now here. The problem though is in Google's eyes, /workshops just vanished and now /events is just there. What a 301 redirect does is it does two things. One is it tells Google to take all the clout equity that you built on that page to then transfer it over to the new URL. As well as if anybody has that bookmarked, including on searching for it and finding out on google.com, it'll automatically forward to the new page as well. So it's super imperative. Again, like it breaks my heart sometimes when we've had clients come to us when they built a new website and someone didn't realize the impact of SEO or specifically 301 redirects. And again, I've seen this unfortunately where someone's ranking really well, has their website done, and they just crater because no 301 redirects were done. And again, it looks like to Google that this site vanished and now this new one just appeared. Even though it's the same URL sometimes, it's still though looking that almost all those pages disappeared and these are all the new ones. So you want to make sure, especially if you're rebuilding a website, that you mark down every single URL and then you map it to the new one, as well as if you ever decide to change page names in the future, even it's more usually onesie twosies types of things, then you would also want to make sure that you do a 301 redirect for any of those pages. Now, how you do a 301 redirect is all DIY website builders usually have a system built in, and you just have to Google that. A WordPress or whatever, you're going to want to download a plugin. The one I recommend is called Redirection. So if you download the Redirection, you would essentially say, hey, this is the link, this is where it should forward. Bam, it does that, and then it communicates it to Google. Elizabeth?
From Deb, is there a plugin or tool to look for missing pages that need 301 redirects?
Yep, so actually that redirection plugin that I talked about also does the 404 errors. So you can actually see if something does break or for instance, some changes happened or whatever. So that redirection plugin actually does both. So.
And what was that called again?
Redirection.
Redirection.
Perfect. I'm just going to kind of keep it going. Those couple other ones that I skipped, we're actually going to be talking about here in just a second. But I want to make sure that we're kind of keeping going. I know we're doing a lot of good questions and good information, but I want to make sure we get this and respect everyone's time. So the one thing to remember with front-end optimization, again, this is all about your content. So the biggest thing that I can actually kind of tell you about this, the biggest thing to start with is make sure that every product or every service has its own page. You want to make sure that every product or service has its own page. Now, yes, you can have one service page that says, hey, here's all my services. And, like for instance, web development, SEO, SEM, social media, consulting, all that fun stuff. Like for instance, Go Marketing does. I can have one service page that does that. And then you could click on web development and go further into a page. That's fine. But what you don't want to do is just rely on one single page that just has a bunch of bullet points or even just, half sentences or half paragraphs describing your services. Think about it this way, is treat your services and your service pages like the absolute gold that they are really, because this is the main point to communicate to Google what you do and where you do it. If you think about it, if we spend all this time building a website and all this kind of stuff, and then we half-ass the service page, well, again, how is that going to look to Google? If Google really thinks that you only care about your services enough to tell them a couple bullet points, well, they're not going to rank you because they don't even fully understand the breadth and the scope and the demographic and the location of all those services and how it's related, because you're only giving them a bullet point or two. So the idea is you can have one of those pages, but make sure it links to another page that goes more in depth. Now, on average, we recommend about 300 to 500 words per page. And again, we want to make sure that it's, that we mix in those keywords and those key phrases. This is also sometimes where it can be helpful to get somebody like a copywriter or even just a second pair of eyes on this, because sometimes we can go be a little too close to it to kind of sometimes finish it. Not always, and if you have that, great. I'm not saying you can't write your own content, but I'm just saying for those that, again, may want a second pair of eyes, or potentially sometimes, like for instance, clients that work with us, when we do content creation for them, they'll sometimes either speak to us, we take down notes, write it. They give us bullet points, then we write it. Some people don't like, again, writing a full page of type of stuff, and that's okay. So utilize some resources, even internally or externally, just to make sure though that every service page or almost every page on your site, you should make sure that you're really striving for 300 to 500 words per page. Some of the stuff you can kind of see here is, try to avoid copying and pasting. You just want to make sure that you're not copying and pasting from other sites and things like that, because Google does index that to that URL on that website. And then when you copy and paste that over to you, what essentially you're telling Google is that, again, that content is so good that you actually don't even need to create content, or that their content is so good that you're just going to take it, and you're essentially almost giving them somewhat of a backlink to be able to, again, actually reinforce their content. So try and stay away from content. That's where, again, taking the time to actually create this content, to do all this other kind of stuff is really important. And why I say, again, the extra effort you put in will definitely help you out. And then last but not least on the bottom there is the media to text ratio. I kind of alluded to this before, but really what this is getting at is Google does not want to see just black text on a white background. You want to kind of change it up. The reason for this is studies have shown, which I'm sure all of us can relate to, that just seeing black text on a white background is boring and it's not engaging, and we don't want to read it. No one's going to sit there and read 4 paragraphs of just that. So figuring out a way to break up text. Header tags are one way to actually do that. Pictures are another way to do that. Color blocks are a way to do that. Sidebars are a way to do that. Studies have shown that when your text goes full length across a page, it's a lot harder and it's a lot more off-putting than actually, again, shrinking that kind of with a sidebar and pushing that content from here down to here. And it's still the same content, it's just more compact. And it's easier to read. So those are the types of things that we want to look at when we look at our content. Now, the content itself is the most important piece, but we can actually add that extra and then some by being able to, again, have some of these other things like header tags, like, again, making sure that we have the images, that we have the extra service pages, all that kind of stuff. So another one to kind of keep in mind is an SSL. So a lot of us probably have an SSL, but it's the HTTPS, or a lot of times the little green padlock. The reason I mention this is there's still people out there that don't have one. Really, you absolutely need an SSL. SSLs were created initially for e-commerce. That, again, essentially what an SSL does is anything that's on that page is essentially like encrypting it or securing it. So that the reason e-commerce it was used a lot is because if I'm putting in my credit card information, obviously I do not want someone stealing that. But Google has found and really kind of wants this to be across all websites. And they came up with this update over a year ago now, where they want to see, even just informational websites that have contact forms or just, ones in general have an SSL. So what's kind of nice is if you don't have an SSL, and you'll actually notice, because at the bottom here, you'll actually kind of see not secure. Again, kind of there, you'll actually see that notification there that says not secure, which A, is off-putting to users, and B, can potentially actually infect your SEO because Google wants it to be secure. So what you want to do is if you see this happening, you want to make sure to go to your hosting provider, and they're going to be the best ones to provide you with an SSL. A lot of the DIY builders can offer them for free. A lot of even hosting services offer them for free too, depending on sometimes your hosting plan. Otherwise, if you have to buy one, they're sometimes usually around the $75 per year kind of price range. Again, this not only protects your users' information, but this also looks good to Google and also prevents our website from having that not secure look, which obviously is not a good thing from a marketing perspective. So make sure you have your SSL, make sure that it's implemented correctly, and go to your hosting provider as probably your first line of defense for that. Also, another big thing that's become is website speed. So Google, again, has always loved, fast websites, but continues to increase the, again, like the importance of them. And I'm sure we all can kind of relate to this. Who likes a slow website? Everyone loves fast. No one has time to sit there to actually have it load. But believe it or not, here's just some stats for you to kind of look at. Now, again, some of this may not be all on you. If someone's in a remote area, if someone's internet's not working, obviously that's not on you, but there is a lot that can be done on your website to make sure these sites are fast. So the first thing is knowing that about over half of people will leave a website if it doesn't load within 3 seconds. Also, this is kind of crazy. I know this is a couple years old or whatever, and it's kind of changed, but the average mobile site speed took 22 seconds to load in 2018, which again, that's kind of come down. But even if we did half of that, that's still 11 seconds, even a third of that, like we just get into kind of some of these crazy numbers that are sometimes double, triple, quadruple, quintuple what we should be looking for. And so this is an important piece to kind of look at that. We build all of our websites for desktop and we test them there, but we also need to make sure that we're testing them on a mobile device because you can have 2 separate experiences. So one thing that I always like to kind of reference is Pingdom is a really good kind of tool. It's a third-party tool that you can actually test your website speed. It will give you kind of a report card. Also, Google has their own speed test, and unfortunately, they don't have a very catchy name. So you would just have to do Google website speed test. And it will actually just have to Google that and it will send you right there. Even the URL is really ugly, but it's another kind of good tool within Google as well to give you kind of a grade. I always recommend trying to do 2 because some platforms will aggressively do stuff, or you sometimes want to maybe do them 3 times within 10 minutes because maybe at that 1 second, believe it or not, it's happened. It can sometimes you just had a glitch. So I'm just saying that try to use Pingdom, try to use Google, try to do a few tests on each of them over several minutes or whatnot, and then kind of to get a good feel for what your website speed is. Now, again, how do we actually change some of that? And again, it will kind of give you kind of a report card, but you can compress images. If you use WordPress, there's one plugin that I like to use called Imagify that can actually go into your WordPress platform and actually compress all your images without losing any latency. I also have a platform on my computer called Shrinkomatic. There's a bunch of other ones online too, but the idea is when you upload an image, you want to try to make sure that it's under a megabyte. Again, when we get over a megabyte, it just becomes so much for the, we don't want a 6 megabyte photo that you maybe downloaded from Adobe stock. A lot of those images, you're going to most likely, if you go to stock places, you're going to have to compress them because they're going to be too big just to throw on your website. We want to make sure that we have browser caching. And so this is, a lot of times, this is sometimes a plugin. There's a caching plugin that you can do within like WordPress. Weebly, Wix, Squarespace, you're not going to be able to do some of this stuff. We want to make sure that we enable compression. This a lot of times also is done within a browser caching plugin. You're going to kind of have to read through some of them. A lot of them have kind of like the, hey, here's the quick and easy way, and this is what we're going to do. It's usually the best place to start. Also, speed can really be determined on your hosting ground. And this is also why I try to tell people is don't always cheap out on your hosting. If Bluehost or GoDaddy is holding a special for $3.99 for hosting, that's great. But, again, value comes sometimes with cost, or you kind of get what you pay for is really what I'm trying to say. And if you buy, again, crappy hosting, you can actually see the adverse effect of it via speed and stuff like that. So a lot of times, another thing that I encourage is to do CMS specific hosting. So that means, like, for instance, like we do this at Skull Marketing when people host with us, is we just host like WordPress sites on one server on certain servers. We just, again, do Joomla on another one. Why that's important is you can actually improve security, you can improve speed and things like that you can kind of see here when all of them are the same and not just open source shared with every type of CMS platform. So take a look at your hosting plan and, again, and if you're finding that your site is slow, you may want to potentially upgrade that. And then last but not least is, again, like for instance, even like Pingdom and some of them, they have, again, some plugins to kind of help. And there are a lot of times freemium where you can just get free ones and then kind of go up from there. But really, the idea is taking those report cards that you get from Pingdom or Google and then either trying to do them yourself or trying to have someone help you. Because what's kind of nice is once you get it going and you get the system done, you shouldn't need to keep doing some of these things. Besides potentially if you're trying to continuously, if you're downloading images that are large sizes, you probably have to continuously compress them. Question.
Yeah, was there another image compressing platform that you use besides Shrinkomatic?
Imagify.
Okay.
So those are the two that I use.
We'll save, Laura, we're gonna save that question for the end.
Perfect. Okay, so now kind of the transformation between kind of mobile devices and, again, going that we know that we've essentially moved from a desktop to then we had mobile specific sites. Now we kind of have responsive where it's kind of a liquid template. The important thing to realize though is Google is moving towards a mobile first indexing. It may not sound like a lot, but it's actually a pretty revolutionary kind of really important thing. Really what this is telling us is that Google, instead of looking at your desktop first and then kind of associating that with your mobile experience, they're now doing the reverse. They're looking at your mobile site first and then essentially kind of applying that to your desktop. Obviously, why that's important is that a lot of times when we build websites, we build them with, again, we have to build them a lot of times on a desktop, of course, and then we look at the user experience from a desktop. Sometimes we forget about the mobile experience. Or for instance, if you had a website built 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we may not have thought about the mobile experience that much, and that could be now impacting our SEO score and our relationship with Google. So we want to make sure that we realize the reason Google's doing this is because user experience testing has showed them that obviously the majority of web traffic is now done a mobile device, and it's been like that for about 5 years now, and it only increases and increases from there. So with that, what are some of the things that we can do? So you want to remember too is, so how a responsive design kind of works is it's going to take all of the content to the left and up first. So anything that's obviously higher up is going to be prioritized and anything more to the left. So the upper left-hand corner essentially of your website is the most important type of piece. And essentially what it does is it splices your website and then just stacks it on top of each other. So we want to make sure that we're prioritizing the content, also prioritizing our call to actions. If you've got a really good call to action, maybe it's a button that says call now, but it's way on the right-hand side of your desktop and it looks great. When we go on the mobile device, that's maybe way at the bottom. Maybe that's fine, but you also maybe want to think through that kind of stuff because maybe we want to put that towards the top and reorganize that so when someone's looking at a mobile device, they don't have to scroll through the entire page to get down to the call to action. So things like that, it's important to kind of realize. Also, this is actually something new that's has come out with, in that you can actually hide content with expandable features, meaning like accordions or buttons and stuff like that. And this can be important for mobile devices. Google used to actually hate doing this because it took an extra step for them. If you kind of hid, I'm sure we've all seen that where you can kind of have a content, you click a button and it does this. Well, again, like that's kind of behind some coding to make it do that. And Google didn't like that because it was actually extra for them to actually read it. Well, with this mobile first indexing, they realized that sometimes the best user experience isn't to have all of maybe your 500 words, or if you have 1,000 words, maybe it's not the best to have all those. Maybe we want to find ways to shrink that, if that's either learn more buttons or if that's accordions or something like that. And so the other thing to remember is just the speed too. So you want to make sure you have your best practices. There is something called accelerated mobile pages that you can really get into if you'd like. They're called AMP pages within kind of Google. Something that you're probably not going to get into unless that's most likely a phase 3 or phase 4 thing. But you want to make sure you're using the best practices and testing it on your own device. So, and so just remembering that, again, if you have a mobile only version, you need to do SEO on that. Most of us probably aren't going to have a mobile only version. Again, if you can take the screen on your desktop and move it and your website moves with it, you have a responsive design. I'd say over 90% of our clients have that. And then just last but not least is just make sure you test your mobile site, especially again, if you had this site built 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, you want to make sure that you're testing that. Okay, now starting to wrap it up a little bit with some offsite optimization things. Oh, sorry about that. And so the first thing is, like we kind of talked about, is offsite optimization and dealing with, again, everything that's not your website. So the first thing is social media. So realizing that Facebook, Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, and Snapchat, all of these, again, are kind of out there. Now, really the ones that are going to give you the SEO benefit though, are going to be Facebook, Twitter, Google My Business, Pinterest, and a little bit of LinkedIn. That doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't be on Instagram or Snapchat, but the best SEO benefit, because of the relationships that Facebook has with Google, that Twitter has with Google, and Pinterest has with Google, that you're going to see the most benefit there. The idea is to make sure you're, again, listed on these platforms, that your website and your profile is filled out, and that you're going to be utilizing these platforms as well. Local listings are one of, again, the best ROI type of things that you can do for SEO. And Google local listings are going to be the little red pins on the map. So this is going to be Google My Business, Bing Maps, Yahoo listings, Yelp listings. Those are really kind of our top 4 that we kind of look at there. And it's important to kind of look and try and analyze all 4 of them and to see about getting on all 4 platforms. Now, sometimes depending on your business, Yahoo will a lot of times now pay for it. And so it's most likely not the best just to pay for a single listing like that. But Google, Bing, Yelp are completely free. And 2 things I like to mention too about that is Google obviously is, or Google Maps obviously pulls from Google My Business. So if you want to show up on Google Maps on a phone, on a computer, on an Android or even iPhone, that's what you're going to do. Yelp is actually, again, integrated into Apple Maps. So if you're ever concerned about showing up on Apple Maps on an iPhone, you want to make sure that your listing is integrated into Yelp, because that's how they're going to pull that information. So you want to make sure that we're, again, really utilizing local listings. A couple platforms that I like to kind of tell people is you can start to, there are literally dozens upon dozens upon dozens of different local listings out there. Now, what you want to do though is, again, you want to focus on these, and you'd like to be listed on all of them, but a lot of times it's a lot of work and a lot of, potentially if you're having someone else do it, it can be a lot of cost to actually be able to do those things. So the 2 platforms that I recommend is, one is called Moz Local, off of that company that I talked about previously, but Moz Local, as well as Yext, Y-E-X-T, they offer programs where they have integrations into a lot of these different databases, and you can essentially fill out your profile there, and then it shoots it out to all of them. Now, I still highly recommend you manually filling out Google, Bing, and Yelp, just because they're so important and imperative. But all of the other ones, the dozens upon dozens of other ones that can still help you, you want to, again, I encourage you to kind of look at some of those platforms. Now, there is a cost involved, and you can kind of see see the different levels that they have. But, again, I would highly recommend looking at them because they're a lot of times going to be advantageous. And then last but not least on local listings is, and this especially is for Google and Yelp, and then even a little bit of Facebook on your business page, is maintaining and just keeping up and managing your reviews. Believe it or not, obviously getting more reviews can help you rank better. Responding to reviews can not only help, again, with rankings, but also help with user experience and just user psychology, meaning that if you get a negative review and you respond publicly, politely, and explain the situation, studies have shown that it actually mitigates the value of that negative review. Whereas obviously if you were to not respond, or respond rudely, you can actually exasperate that as well. So, things like that from a user perspective and from a marketing perspective, but also reviews absolutely can help from an SEO perspective as well. Elizabeth, do we have a question?
Well, questions. Is Nextdoor.com and Foursquare, are they considered local listings?
Yep. So, I mean, yes and no. So again, like those would be ones that you could still potentially kind of get on and kind of do. Nextdoor is a little bit different because it's more kind of closed off because again, like there's meant to be some privacy on there, but absolutely if you're in the trades or the service, it can be a good marketing tool, not necessarily a huge SEO benefit, but can be there. Foursquare, on the other hand, is a little bit more open source. So yes, that one have a little bit more juice than Nextdoor, for instance. Okay, last but not least is video. Now I do a whole workshop just on video, and obviously I'm just giving you guys one slide here, but really start to think about video. And the reason we say YouTube is because YouTube's the second largest search engine in the world and Google owns it. So Google not only has one, but also has two. Why I say we focus on Google and the rest will essentially follow. So it's the second largest search engine in there. What we're finding is new stats actually just came out from some more research being done, and they say about 2/3 of people would actually rather have digest information via video than actually reading it. And so, again, that's really important when we start to look even at our service pages, our website, our about, even some of our blogs and things like that. It's potentially really important, not only from a marketing perspective, when we have 2/3 of people saying they'd rather, again, have a video than actually read it, but also, again, this is other rich media content that we can create. It's the second largest search engine. It can actually help, for instance, if we create a YouTube page and it's connected to our website, our videos are connected to our website, our videos are embedded in the website, all of those types of things. Obviously, that also helps our SEO, and videos by themselves can actually show up within search results. So the idea is, again, if you're looking for that next thing, which is, honestly, it's already here and it's already been here, but as we're looking at video, the thing is, even though video's been here, it obviously is, 5-6 years ago when people were asking, well, what should we be doing? What's the thing? And that, back then it was blogging, which is now just a staple of what we do. Again, the thing with, I get that blogging can sometimes be easier because you can kind of create content off hours anytime you want. Videos do take some time to kind of think and lay them out. Now, a couple of things I do like to mention about video though is I'm not saying you need to go hire a videographer every single time for these. You may want to because you can get some good videos, but what I'm saying though is utilize tools that you have at your disposal now. These types of, devices, our smartphones, our laptops and stuff like that can create great content. We could do, again, we're recording this session right now. I'm taking opportunity to create content. You could do a behind the scenes with your phone or a selfie type of video, begin to create content. There's a couple different platforms that I like to kind of tell people about. One is promo video. Promo video is a bunch of stock videography that you can kind of take and put your own animations on and do all this other kind of fun stuff, as well as something like Powtoons, which is more animations but more cartoony. Also, obviously, if we have iMovie like on our iPhones, we can utilize those. YouTube even has some video editing software within YouTube that's completely free. We can put jingles, we can splice, we can do this other kind of stuff. So the idea is look to start to create some content. Not only is it great for SEO, it's great for marketing. It's also a fantastic competitive advantage. Because a lot of times, again, as we all probably can, again, go around the room and ask if we've done videos, most likely we haven't either done them or haven't done them enough to really kind of take advantage of them. So videos are very important. again, not only from a marketing perspective, not only from a competitive advantage standpoint, but also can be critical for your SEO. Okay, so with that said, is again, we've talked here about search engine optimization. We've gone really in depth on the back-end optimization, looking at our meta titles, our header tags, our SSL, the speed of our site, the front-end optimization, all the content, the text to media ratio, making sure we have a ton of stuff on there, offsite optimization, making sure that we have accounts on social media, on local listings, all of this type of stuff. And it's making sure that we have all of that and it's all essentially kind of connected together. That's the most important thing here, is remembering that we have different levels of SEO or different aspects of it, but also that SEO is going to be, remember, kind of that thing that keeps all of us kind of together between social media and even offline and online, all this other kind of stuff. It has its fingers in almost all of our marketing nowadays because of what it does and kind of brings everything together. So with that, I want to kind of open it up. I know we've answered a lot of questions as it is, but I know we even saved a couple for the end, and I want to see if anybody else has any other ones, knowing that if we don't get a chance to, feel free. Obviously, you have my information here. Feel free to reach out and be more than happy to kind of do that. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to see if we have any more questions.
Let's see. So Laura had a question and it's in the chat. She says her website is on Wix. She was recently told that Wix sites don't index high on Google and that I should switch to WordPress or something else. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so great question. Not really necessarily true. I will say, like, for instance, my favorite is WordPress and there, but if your only thing is to, hey, Ben, I want to rank higher, and that's the only reason you're switching over to WordPress, it's, again, not going to be just a magic bullet that's going to be kind of there. So you absolutely can still rank high with Wix sites, with Weebly sites, with those things. What starts to happen, though, is WordPress is like 100% open source. So you can get after every piece of content, every piece of layer of coding and stuff like that to communicate to Google, whereas Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, sometimes we're capped at 80, 85% or 90% or whatever, but we can't get as much access to things. So that's a lot of times where you're not necessarily handicapped, or doesn't mean you can't rank. Like, honestly, we've worked with some clients where we've built them due to budgets, due to their skill level of managing their site, sites on Weebly or Wix or Squarespace, and they outrank other WordPress sites that are on there. So just because of your CMS systems, that's not going to be necessarily the determining factor. Now, again, WordPress can help a little bit in that it's completely open source, but if that's your only reason, and like, for instance, if you built your Wix site last year, and you're worried about, again, kind of switching over for that reason, I would potentially kind of shy away from that, because you can still do a lot of good content, foundational SEO things within Wix. Now, eventually, maybe your next one that you do, or whenever that time comes, you maybe want to peg WordPress as there, because then we get the fully open source experience.
Okay. Wix runs JavaScript first before content is displayed. Would this impact Google indexing and ranking?
No, not necessarily, because again, Wix is big enough where Google knows this and knows how to kind of essentially index those types of things.
Okay.
Especially now, a lot of the mobile first indexing, that kind of stuff can actually speed up some stuff. So it can actually, again, doesn't really have an adverse effect.
Is Resmushit a compressing platform that you know of?
Unfortunately, never heard of that one, but it sounds funny and cool.
And then there's the one that was back here at like, is there anything specific for Wix to help with the 301 redirect?
Yep. So they do have one built in. And so like Wix, for instance, has like they call an SEO wizard kind of in the back end. And that's where like SEO Yoast, like on WordPress, would be kind of similar. It helps you kind of walk through some of those things. But yes, they do actually have a redirection plugin and an application on the back end of Wix.
So if you were to have your website redone by a marketing firm, do they go ahead and they check the 301 redirects and the 404s and everything for you?
Not necessarily. That's why you have to just check or whatever. I say most of them should. Again, I've had too many, honestly, I've had too many horror stories than I should have of people going to someone else for just, maybe they didn't even know us or whatnot. They had a website built and then they come to us going, Ben, what the hell happened here? Whatever. And we find out that the person knew how to build websites, but knew nothing about SEO. So it's just one of those things that you at least want to ask for. Again, digital marketing, again, agencies like, again, School Marketing, we're obviously not the only one and the only one that knows this and does this, but you want to make sure that you ask because again, I have seen too many times and honestly, I hate it because it's such a simple thing. And it can have honestly catastrophic, if it's not caught soon enough, again, if you catch it soon enough, you can kind of reverse some of it. But if you don't catch it soon enough, you literally are SOL and you have to build up your relationship with them again. So yeah, so be very careful, please, and not to try to scare people, but I'd rather have you guys scared a little bit, make sure you ask the questions, than be SOL and screwed once you get that built and 301 redirects were, again, disregarded or forgotten about or did not know about.
Uma says, I see my business listed in Google Maps, but not in Google search results. What am I missing?
So you most likely, Uma, need some help with that foundational SEO or just SEO in general, because again, they're related, but they're also kind of separate. So a lot of times we can potentially kind of see us kind of go within maps. And that's where, some of the stuff that we talked about today with laying that foundation, doing all that type of stuff, that's the stuff that, again, would want to be looked at to be done because obviously something is amiss then that Google isn't, again, from a relationship standpoint, isn't being able to be connected to you right now.
What other workshops do you have coming up for?
So actually, that's a great kind of segue for, again, Uma, for saying that is two things. One is, again, I encourage actually Uma specifically, but anyone else that's kind of listening to this is, we actually also offer free consultations. This is not a sales pitch. If you guys want to talk to me about my services, awesome. We'd be more than happy to. But we also know that a lot of these things are heady. A lot of these things are just maybe just need a little bit more help with if it's making sure the 301, looking at our website to give us some more in-depth analysis. And that's really what we're here for, is to help the community, to help those types of things. Again, if you want to talk about our services, awesome, but you don't have to. And that's not obviously why we are here. And that's why I do them. It's really kind of give back. So I encourage anyone that's interested, literally all you have to do is just email us and we'll set up a consultation. It's essentially you're getting us for a free amount of time, no obligation stuff. And we can go, for instance, like with Uma or with the 301 redirect, or I think it was Loretta was talking about those products. We can actually talk a little bit more specifically. So encourage you guys, if you're ever interested, just reach out and we'd be more than happy to set those up, as well as what Elizabeth alluded to, as I encourage you guys to check out some of our other workshops that can also help you understand more of this stuff, or especially if you're doing this internally or having someone do this internally and you guys want to know more, obviously this is one of about 10 workshops that we do. So we have different workshops, and you can actually, we've been obviously recording a lot of these due to the times that we're in right now, and you can find them on our YouTube channel as well as obviously tune in live so we can answer some questions. But we have them on, more SEO, Google Analytics, Google AdWords. We have a fun one or an interesting one right now, marketing during COVID. We have some that are video based. We've got, again, a bunch of them, and some of them that are different levels and things like that. So I really encourage you to kind of check out our workshops, check out our YouTube channel, and then also if ever interested, reach out and we can set up a free consultation. We can just help you more to kind of get to that next level or get that plan of action down for you internally.
Awesome. Do we have time for one more last question?
Yep, absolutely.
So Loretta has a company built their website, but she adds products on the website on the admin side. We have products that are discontinued all the time. Do they need to do the 301 redirect when they take the products off of their website?
If that product is not coming back, absolutely, again, I would highly, highly recommend. And if it is coming back and it's just, again, discontinued usually obviously means it's not coming back. So I would absolutely recommend a 301 redirect, because again, what's going to happen is if you keep discontinuing products, those, just look up, those just get reported to Google as 404 errors, which is something that negatively impacts you because Google wants to see on obviously ideally 0 404 pages. They want every page that's indexed and every page that's accessible to be actually accessible. If you take away one of those pages, then we need to reroute that, even if it's just to the home page or the shop page, just to kind of close up that loop. Or potentially, even if you're discontinuing one because there's a new model, then you could just again, redirect it to that too.
Excellent. Well, I put a little bit of information on the reserve into the chat if you guys are interested in a free workday at all. Otherwise, Ben, thank you again so much. This is so awesome. You, again, are such a wealth of information. It's amazing.
No, it's my pleasure. And like I said, if anyone has any questions, if we didn't get to them, or obviously if things come up, feel free to, again, just reach out, and we're more than happy to, again, connect. And as Elizabeth and I both said at the beginning, not only do we guys appreciate you guys tuning in, we will be sending you guys the recording of this, as well as I'll be sending you guys a thank you email with the presentation in it. So again, I want to thank you guys all for tuning in. I know we're all busy, so I appreciate your time, and skål.
Have a good day.